Hello, everyone. Welcome to another great episode of Story of a Startup. Jessica and I today have Ravi Kurani, who is the founder of Sutro Connect, and he has a really amazing story. Ravi, I'm so glad that you reached out to us today. I enjoyed getting to know you a couple of weeks ago before we're diving into this conversation. When you describe Sutro to someone who's never heard of it before, what's the elevator pitch? How do you get people to grasp the idea?
Yeah, the elevator pitch is it's a floating test kit that measures if your water is safe. You put it into your pool or hot tub, and it basically tells you your water chemistry on an Android or Apple application. So you know what to do with your water and when to do it.
So it works for like all pools, I'm assuming, like saltwater, chlorine, all the different types of pools that people have, I would imagine. And then, so are people like, I have a pool at my house in Palm Springs and I have a pool guy. And actually, this is a really interesting conversation for me because it's like been one of the biggest issues with my house. It's a rental, is managing the pool and having, I've probably cycled through like four or more pool people in the last few years. And it seems like a hard thing for people to get. Like we've had a lot of issues with the chemistry getting off and them not really knowing how to troubleshoot. So this feels like a super helpful, like problem solution type product that you've created.
Yeah, no, I mean it's definitely a problem, right? I think if you think about just managing a swimming pool, let me actually jump to the 50,000 foot level. So
Yeah.
around 12% of US households have a pool or spa in their backyard. 85% of these people actually are what we call DIYers. They do it themselves. They'll go to a Home Depot, a Walmart, they'll go to a pool store, they'll test the water themselves. 15% are kind of actually more of what your demographic is, right? They have a pool service technician, a pool guy that
Mhm.
comes out to actually service their water. In that kind of dichotomy, if you like imagine what the DIYer does, they'll have to go out there and basically dip a little test strip inside their swimming pool, which is what they commonly do. They'll take a look at some colors, and then they'll have to like run basically the equivalent of like master's level chemistry on their swimming pool, and then like figure out exactly what chemicals to put in and when. Um, and that's if you like kind of know what's happening, right? If you like own the home and it's your family and your family's going in the pool, you like I've seen your kids or your family members, whatever it is, in the pool. If it's a rental, you don't know what that Airbnb guest has done, right? Like you don't know if they were in there last night, you don't know if they were in there today, you don't know if they had a bunch of kids. Bather load, like the amount of bathers that are in the swimming pool, has a linear relationship to how quickly your chemistry actually changes. And
Yeah.
so, because it's kind of sight unseen, you end up actually having a bigger problem.
Yep.
And so, yeah, a device like this would like very much help. And we actually have a lot of Airbnb and like rental owners that actually use our product.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. Yeah, because we have, I get a lot of bachelorette parties and it's in Palm Springs. So there's like 12 women and like a lot of sunscreen and oil going into the pool all the time, which
Nice.
is like the constant
Yeah,
complaint from my pool guys.
Coachella rentals as well,
And
right?
hopefully that's the worst of it.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
I'm just
Yeah.
imagining like the visual in my head, just a pool. It looks like an oil spill or
Oh,
something, just
like
like
oil,
forming.
like, yeah, and like call in like the EPA or whatever. Yeah.
Robbie, I actually bought one of the Sutro Connects since we chatted. So my wife's uncle owns a property across the street. They have a pool. They're amazing. They let us use the pool all the time, right? And for a while, the washer and dryer. And we're like, okay, we're going to get him a gift to say thank you. And ended up, we had this conversation. So I was excited about it. The product came and its packaging is beautiful. It's a big shout out there. Um,
Yeah. Nice job with that. I was looking, it looks really beautiful.
and for
Thank
what
you.
it's worth, my wife's uncle was very impressed. He's very grateful. And like, it's such an interesting idea, as Jessica mentioned, product market fit. Take us back to kind of your story when you came, like, what were the key moments in your life where you're like, led you to creating this?
Yeah, it's kind of two tangential stories. The roots actually I grew up in sunny Southern California, very, very close to Palm Springs, actually, in a city called
Mm-hmm.
Riverside.
Mm-hmm.
My dad actually used to have a chain of pool and spa supply stores in Southern California. So I basically grew up as one of these pool boys, right? The
Yeah.
guys that would run around in the pickup truck. We would like figure out kind of how to service pools. I would actually like run one of my dad's pool stores in Huntington Beach. And so, yeah, grew up in the pool industry, ended up getting a mechanical engineering degree and an MBA from Middlebury College. In the middle, I kind of had a short stint in NASA. Actually, I was working at NASA in their. We were working at like jet engines,
Mm-hmm.
and I just got kind of
Casual.
really tired of like being an engineer. And so I worked as a venture capitalist in India, and we primarily focused on investing on technologies that helped what was called the bottom of the pyramid, or people who earned less than $2 a day. And so I got
Yeah.
to see a really interesting amount of technology, of which water is a big problem in India. And so a lot of our deal flow was around like water filtration. A lot of people were like,
Mm-hmm.
we have this filter that's going to help us clean the water. Um, but the interesting thing with water is it is different based off your application, right? So like, let's take drinking water, agriculture, food and beverage, swimming pools. The water that starts off that's going to your swimming pool is the same, but the kind of topographic need of what you need in a swimming pool is different than what you would need for your drinking water. For example, you put a lot more chlorine in your swimming pool because it kills off bacteria, versus you probably don't want to be taking cupfuls of that pool water and drinking it. And so the input water is the same, but sensing it and then changing it for your end application is the kind of really important part. And so that happens with sensing. And we set out to build the first water sensor that was not $10,000, could be used by a consumer, and was not prone to human error like a test strip or a test kit was.
Mm-hmm.
Tried selling it to the Indian government. Stupidest an idea a startup can have is, we're probably going to die on the vine trying to wait until somebody in the Indian government bought this thing. And so the story came full circle. I moved back to the US while I was in India. And we flipped the model on its head. I'm like, hey, I used to be a pool boy. Water sensing is water sensing. Let's just dial the like topographic needs of what we need for a swimming pool versus what we need for drinking water, and sell into the swimming pool market. Let's sell to wealthy pool owners, take the margin, reinvest it back in the company, and invest it in the engineers that can now build the technologies for drinking water, for agriculture, for food and beverage. And so that's kind of how we built the model and our story of how we got to where we're at today.
And what year did you guys start? What year was this founded?
We started in 2014.
Okay.
I wanted to I think from our previous conversation, you said something really eloquently, and I was really inspired by it. And I think you said like being everywhere at the intersection of wherever water is used is almost like a vision of the company.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me more about that. I am fascinated with the idea.
Yeah, it's kind of an allusion to what we saw when we were in India. We want to be everywhere that water is being used today, and we want to be
Mm-hmm.
at that input node so we can actually measure what the water chemistry is, so we can tell people what to do safely to make sure that the water that they're using is the way that they need it. What that like physically means, right, is water primarily, the largest user of water is in agriculture. We use water to grow all the food that we eat, right? In that water chemistry, if you're looking at a Central California farm that's growing lettuce, when you plant a lettuce seed, it like requires a certain amount of nutrients that it pulls from the soil and from the water throughout its like lettuce life cycle,
Yeah.
until it grows, and then it's able to be picked, and then we basically eat it in a salad. The way that you actually put the nutrients in that water is through a process called fertigation. It's fertilizer
Mm-hmm.
plus irrigation, right? You
I worked at
combine
an
both those two
organic
together.
farm. Actually, I worked at an organic farm in South Carolina, and starting a farm here. We probably didn't cover it in a previous conversation, but we would do that with some of the hemp fields we had a few years ago. We'd fertigate
Yeah,
through the irrigation system.
through the actual irrigation systems, right? And so
Yeah.
you're like reverse engineering what the hemp needs, what the lettuce needs.
Hmm.
You're putting in that fertilizer into the water, and then you're like putting it into the plant, right? So it can get the nutrients that it needs at that particular time.
Yeah.
A lot of farmers, and you might be privy to this, will obviously over fertilize, right? Because they want to kind of overcompensate for the fact of not under fertilizing and getting the plant the nutrients that it needs.
Mhm.
What Sutro would do, right? Why we want to be everywhere that water is used all the time
Yep.
is we could begin to measure the amount of fertilizer that's actually being put in the water, the amount that's actually being eaten up by the plant, and pair that against or map it against what the plant actually needs at that time. And with these three kind of points, we can actually triangulate and figure out how much the plant does need and maybe give the farmer more information that would help them. And secondarily, you don't end up over fertilizing. So you're not getting fertilizer runoff, which is causing all these issues in our lakes, our rivers, our streams. All of our groundwater is getting depleted because fertilizer is getting, seeped into the ground. And so, we can start to mitigate problems like that if we know, if we have knowledge, if we sense what's happening to the water before it actually goes in and gets used for that purpose.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't heard that term before. But it makes perfect sense that you would use the method, the fertigation. So I feel like with water, it always seems like it's about filtering, like you were mentioning. Like everyone's obsessed with like filtering the bad stuff out of water, but then you're right. Like there is a need to kind of like put things in through that vessel as well. So that makes perfect sense.
Yeah. And the majority of water is treated. Like there is something that's done to it in like every single processing, right? Like if
Yeah.
you think about NVIDIA and all these like chips that we have, like all these racks that we have, those require silicone chips, and silicone chips are created in a clean room. The clean room needs really, really clean water. That water is treated. It's filtered to a
Mm-hmm.
particular degree to make sure that you can manufacture that. In the built environment, right? You go to New York City, to Austin, to Chicago. Any of these big major cities have cooling water tanks at the top of their buildings. Those end up getting calcification on there. And
Mm-hmm.
so those also need to be treated to kind of figure out what type of calcium content is inside the water before they put them through those. And so in kind of every one of these applications, water needs to be measured, and it usually is manually, and then it needs to be treated the same way that it is for your swimming pool.
I have a follow up. If that's I would go, continue on this thread. I find it's fascinating. So when we're talking about Sutro, and so you have like My Sutro, right, which is this consumer product, and then you were saying that there's a part of your company that's more on these like B2B solution, right? So if I was understanding right, a Monsanto or a ag giant, ADM, for instance, could come to you and say, hey, we want you to build this technology with us or partner with us so we can have our supply chain or partners benefit from it. Is that something that you're seeing as well?
Yeah, so I sold the company in 2019 to a large water sanitation company.
Yeah.
We primarily have been focusing on the pool and spa industry for the last like 3 or 4 years. So the agricultural use case, the food and beverage use case, they're prototypes that we built, but we're not actively in those markets.
Mm-hmm.
If anybody listening out there from Monsanto or the ag world wants to come and talk to us, we're more than happy to.
Yeah.
The B2B markets that we are going after is actually in the pool industry, and it's starting to move actually into the food and bev industry. So that's the next market that we're actually tackling.
Jessica, do you have a question in mind? I was going to maybe think we could talk about like exits for any entrepreneurs out there. That's always interesting.
I was wanting to talk about that because that is something, important for entrepreneurs to hear about, and that you were able to sell in 2019. We'd love to hear more about that, how that process was for you. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, selling a business is no small task psychologically, or even for like the business world. On top of that,
Mm-hmm.
it's very tough to have something that's your baby that you've kind of built up over the last 3 or 4 years, and then kind of to like sell it and give it to somebody else to make sure that it's in the right hands. But I think we definitely made the right decision with our parent company and our partner to work with them, because it's been absolutely amazing.
How do you know when it's the right time to sell? Like, how did you feel like, okay, now's the time? Or were you approached, or did you decide this is the time and we're going to pursue this now because of X, Y, and Z? Or
Yeah, it was kind of a perfect storm. So we were in the middle of fundraising our Seed Plus. I think we were raising, forget exactly the amount, but it was like to go to manufacturing. And while we were talking to strategics, one of them ended up just kind of putting a bid out, and that's kind of what started this whole process. Um, and so it kind of was the right time at the right place. And looking back, hindsight 2020, I mean, by the time we kicked off manufacturing, COVID was just around the corner. And so like we probably, if we would have, fundraised ourselves and done it ourselves, we probably would have ended up in a much worse position than we could have been in.
That's another common thread is well, a lot of these conversations is like COVID just being such a big disruptor in the industry with people having to like shelter in place almost or, lockdown. Did you see that lead to a spike in sales and or anything or like interest in the product when COVID was happening?
We definitely actually saw a spike in sales because people were sitting at home,
Mm-hmm.
and their kids couldn't go to school. And so the first thing they did was throw them in the swimming pool.
Mm-hmm.
And because, the pool stores were closed and pool guys obviously couldn't come and like service their pools, the first thing people searched online was a Wi-Fi pool monitor. And so our sales actually like went through the roof that first year that we launched because we had again hit the perfect storm of launching the product just at that right time.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't even think about that. But yeah, you're right, Dominic. It's yeah, and everybody was kind of investing in their home setups, like everything that made their home the most, comfortable and livable, and that absolutely makes sense that would have spiked. That's lucky timing, yeah, in a weird way.
What role are you currently playing within Sutro? And as a strategic advisor, use your hand on this on the wheel and steering it. Is it representing the brand in the day to day?
Yeah, a little bit of everything. I still run day-to-day operations. Um, I've we have a pretty amazing team. I mean, my head of product, Alex, manages kind of everything from day-to-day operations with the application to kind of hardware development. And then my head of operations, Leia, is absolutely amazing in managing supply chain, making sure that we have, units in the field. And so my kind of job is more on closing, larger partnerships, figuring out how we get into the food and beverage, figuring out how we get into like the OEM swimming pool partnerships. And so that's like kind of what most of my days actually consist of.
That's cool. It feels like there's such a big market opportunity, maybe in like the food and beverage and or even like a beauty space where you see all this like clean ingredients, clean at Sephora from a beauty, and then all of the food, like processing and everything that's happening around wellness and longevity. Are those the conversations that you're tending to have or starting to see as you look for these partnerships?
I would say yes and no. I think a lot of the partnerships are actually being driven by private equity. So, like for example, this like pool routes, for example, like the guy that comes and services Jessica's pool, many times is actually being bought up by private equity in the U.S. right now. The interesting thing that they want to do is actually enable tech to make sure not only are they having operational upside, but that also they're gluing a lot of their operations in through tech, right? So say for example, we just take this example and run with it.
Mm-hmm.
A private equity firm goes and buys up pool routes. Jessica's pool guy gets bought up, as well as 100 others in the Palm Springs area. And now for the private equity firm to like manage the water chemistry of close to 10,000 swimming pools is a problem. And so that's kind of where Sutro comes in. And that's actually what's driving a lot of the B2B conversations is this sort of roll up and defragmentation strategy that's happening right now.
Does that look more like are you developing a specific monitor? Like, let's say that private equity play has all of a region. Are they branding it under their house and you're providing the infrastructure and all of the pieces and they're like white labeling it? Or are you still being branded through and the consumer?
We're still being branded through. I think we have such a strong brand because we did launch during COVID.
Yeah.
Um, so at the very least, even if they do brand something by themselves, it'll always say powered by Sutro.
Nice.
Because we have IP around the way that we measure the water chemistry, and also just because we have this strong B2C brand.
So taking a step back to, you know, as a consumer looking at the product, comparing like having the traditional way of doing it, like you said, there's either the DIY or have a pool person come and manage it. How much more accurate is it? Like how much better I'm assuming it's a lot more accurate. So I'm just curious to what extent. And it probably depends a lot on the person managing it, I guess. But on the flip side, but for the average person, like how much better of a benefit are they getting with their pool being more regularly maintained by using it?
I forget the statistic, but I think like 10% of men are slightly colorblind.
Oh, wow.
That's a good point.
Which means that if you're using a liquid color test strip that changes colors, you're going to have a 1 in 10 chance, depending on who you're using, to maybe have a little bit of issues there.
Yeah.
The kind of second part is the calculations behind actually measuring what type of chemicals to put in is decently complicated. And we have algorithms on algorithms that calculate this stuff. And even if you look at like a chemistry book, or you buy a test kit and you look at their little booklet, I mean, that in itself is like pretty complicated.
Yeah.
And so, not to say that, you know, the techs out there don't do it right, and there's many of them that do, but it obviously can become an issue if you haven't used somebody that's actually thinking about it properly.
Yeah, and all the pool people I've cycled through have been men too, so maybe that was part of my problem with the color blindness.
You just kept hitting that 10% like every time.
Yeah,
Maybe you should go to Vegas or
so
something.
Unlucky, right? Yeah.
That's cool. So from an entrepreneur point of view, I'd love to hear more about like one of the questions we ask all of our guests is really around this question around partnerships too. So when you were, building your team or coming up with these ideas, I know we kind of know that the milestones of the story, but what was your lane and what partners did you work with, and how was that dynamic? How did that go?
Yeah, and maybe I kind of want to clarify the question a little bit in terms of the partners that we use to like build the product or to fundraise, or what's kind of your
your core team, like the people who were in the room with you when late nights, when times are tough, like carrying it through to the other end.
Yeah, that was very heavily an engineering team, and so we had an amazing mechanical engineer, Alex, our chemical engineer, Dan, and a whole suite of people that actually didn't come through to the acquisition, that actually helped us in building out the technology. In terms of external partners, after we got acquired, we worked very heavily with a contract manufacturer in China, in Shenzhen. And so I spent about 30% of my time for the first 2 years in China, literally working on the floor, figuring out how our product got assembled, understanding kind of how it's going to get shipped across. And then we have a development firm in Europe that actually does all of our software development. So those are kind of two of the heavy kind of legs that we base the company on right now.
Yeah, and the rate, I know the rate for European software development is a discount when compared to the US, so that plays well.
Yeah.
This is very off topic, but I was in Italy this summer, and I was talking to a guy that hosts the like park run. That's like an app where you can do like 5Ks and stuff. And I asked him what his day job was, and he said he does software development for, he's the offshore to a company, and it kind of blew my mind. I hadn't thought about it from that point of view before. Okay, well, back on subject. Curious on your views on everything related to water, Ravi, since you're a subject matter expert here. Water seems like kind of scary times, right? I know that part of the when ISIS was, or it's going to be crazy for a second, when ISIS was more active, part of their strategically building their caliphate, right, was controlling like access to water with pollution and changes in global climate patterns. I know, or runoff from agriculture. Water feels like it's getting more scarce. Like, do you concur with that? What kind of signals are you seeing?
Yeah, we definitely are having more water supply issues. There's a concept called day zero,
Okay.
where if you turn the tap on, it basically won't run. We've seen flavors of that in South Africa. If the audience looks up, day zero South Africa, or Mexico City right now is having a water supply issue. It's becoming more and more prevalent, and so yeah, it's definitely not just hearsay, and definitely for governments to kind of control waterways. You're seeing the same thing in like Vietnam and China. Just waterways are kind of how we provide water to our biggest asset, which is obviously food, growing the food that we have. But secondarily, it also is a great mode of kind of transport, and also, a great infrastructure. And so, yeah, it is definitely problematic.
Yes, but technology will, as much as it's contributed to these problems, will help, right? And so I think Sutro is going to be part of that. And I'm excited, Ravi, to hear how some of these conversations go, right? It could lead to some really fun opportunities. Here's another question that we've been asking recent guests, is related to kind of the moments of entrepreneurialism that you get inspired in day by day, right? I feel like entrepreneurs have this gift for connecting dots that don't necessarily feel like they're connected, or they find opportunities. With your entrepreneurial mind, Ravi, like where else have you just been like looking or seeing things shift? Like what new technologies or events make you excited?
I've honestly been really interested in like the nuclear world. So
Yeah.
looking at fusion and fission. Fission probably a little bit more further out fusion a little bit more further out than fission.
Okay.
Fission is the stuff that we know how to do. That's what we've been doing for the last 100 years. Fusion is how do we create the sun on Earth, basically, is the real premise.
Pandora's
But the
box.
yeah, the kind of real reason that I'm interested in it because if you draw to the kind of root of a lot of the problems that we're having, much of it boils down to energy generation, right? If you kind of had like free and abundant energy that you could use for a lot of things, you would end up changing the way that like geopolitics happen around the world, right? We obviously have a supply chain of oil. You change the way that we generate and could use AI, right? Everybody's like, oh, AI uses a lot of energy. Well, if you just had a lot of energy, you wouldn't have to worry about it. And so that's kind of why I'm like really interested in energy, and in particular looking at like nuclear for that energy source.
Yeah. I mean, it's doesn't emit greenhouse gases, right? I mean, having a
That
lithium,
too,
or not lithium. I mean, my
like
brain keeps going to
uranium.
uranium. My brain keeps going to lithium. So I live in Denver, North Carolina, and
Yeah,
Piedmont Lithium is opening up there's a big lithium deposit near here. I think one of the biggest in the country. And they're opening a Carolina lithium project where they're going to be processing it. And so it's been on my radar as well. And it almost feels, I don't want to downplay how serious energy is, but it almost feels like human history in a lot of ways has been this game of energy, right? And so we're getting to this point where, we've transitioned from coal, but oil has become a little bit, starting to have costs, right? And as the costs go up, we kind of need to get to the next level of the game, right? And I think that's whatever shape the renewable solve comes in. I think, nuclear is really interesting. Is going to be something that happens within the next 80 years or so. That's my prediction, right? I think it has to.
yeah, and I think it's moving really, really quickly. Totally.
If you were going to like think about your approach to entrepreneurialism, how would you summarize that as a takeaway for someone in our audience who's listening? Distill it down. What's a method they can adopt, or a perspective you think that people would benefit from?
I think there's two things I would say. The first is passion. You have to wake up every day and like want to do this because it's tough. If it was easy, everybody would do it. And secondly, is probably consistency. So like showing up every single day after you figured out what you want to do is really just what executes, right? Like trying to do these big magic shows or trying to like get some sort of, slam dunk is really not going to work. It is just the kind of grueling work that actually gets you from day one to day two.
Do you feel that you've noticed characteristics that are consistent within entrepreneurs that you could call out, like that you feel set someone apart as an entrepreneur versus not an entrepreneur? Like, what are those traits in your opinion?
It's literally those two things, honestly. Okay. I think it is every single entrepreneur that I've talked to has those two things. Mm-hmm. And those two things are the ones that just seem to outweigh everything else.
Yeah.
Actually, Ravi, I was doing research on you, of course, before we had our conversation today. I know that you've done a few podcasts ahead of time before this, right? You have your own podcast. And one of the things I saw that caught my eye was you were on a podcast talking about aliens. And from the perspective, I mean, you worked in NASA, right? You used to work on the engineering side over there. Just because some people are Bigfoot people. I'm a UAP person, and that's something that I'm really passionate about. I mean, I listened to the congressional hearings earlier this year. Give us, like, just for fun, what's your take on all of that, right? The congressional hearings were pretty fascinating, I thought.
I didn't listen to the congressional hearings, but I'm like a big sci-fi fan, honestly.
Okay.
And so, I've like read like the Three Body Problem. I read the Hail Mary by Andy Weir, and like through just kind of all of those, it's really interesting to kind of see how extraterrestrial populations, I guess, like would or could communicate with Earth. I think that's what I was talking about in that podcast, is just like the idea of like what would happen if.
That's interesting. I know you're muted, but would they communicate through water, right? Like water being like such a medium that can carry waves, and I don't know. Right.
Or
I mean, people say
telepathy.
That people also say like water is not from this earth, right? They also say that too. I've heard that theory before.
I haven't heard that one.
Okay, that's flat. That's kind of interesting. Like it came in from like an asteroid or.
Potentially, yeah. Like, and there's an interesting, like, I think paper that I read by is it like a Japanese scientist, I think, back in like the 80s?
Okay.
Who had done experiments on how water actually stores memory. Like it's like because it is 70 to 75% of the world. We just don't know how to decrypt it, right? It's just kind of like this.
Is that related?
We don't.
Wow.
Is that like that emoto, like the water crystallite, like when that would form
exactly.
different
like
shapes depending on what words were said or what feelings were emitted to it, and it would be like hate would be like a very
particular
disfigured crystal, and love was like perfectly geometric, like.
Yeah, and I think that's also like a humanization of these like forms. I know that's what his thing was, but I feel like we don't even have like a decrypting engine to like figure that. Like we're placing our views on what these like crystals are, but I also don't know if maybe it doesn't also even show itself that way. We don't really know, but that's like kind of like the theory. It was like a really interesting theory.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine if we could look into those archives, what stories the ocean could tell.
And it's also just like an interesting thought experiment. You think about all of our data and information today, and the majority of them are either synthetic or natural chemicals and bonds that are silicone, that are lithium, that are energy stores. The like radio waves that we have between two Wi-Fi routers, like we just know how to encrypt and decrypt this information based off of the natural molecules that we use to like your iPhone is nothing but a series of compounded molecules put together. And so who's to say that there aren't other stores of memory, right? I don't know anything past that, but that's just kind of the like hypothesis.
Well, as a sci-fi guy, right? That Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the Earth is the computer, or the monolith from 2001: Space Odyssey. I mean, I love all those. Hey, did you like Dune, the Dune movies? Well, as a sci-fi person, I'm curious to hear your take. Yeah.
I haven't seen the second one, but I did really like the first one.
Arrakis. That's what happens when you don't take care of your water, everybody. You don't want to live in a desert planet. Well, that's amazing. Cool. Well, I've loved this conversation, Ravi. I feel like there's been a lot of good nuggets for entrepreneurs who are listening to the show, and it's a completely different from some of the previous episodes we've had, which have been more CPG focused, or even like in the confectionery space. What if we were gonna if anyone is more engineering focused opportunity, I think I'd love to get like a specific take on what differentiates in your mind, having kind of spanned several like categories. How do those types of problems differ, and like what would be advice for someone whose brain is more of that engineering or infrastructure or device creation side?
In terms of like starting a company, or
starting a company, harnessing their unfair advantage of what science they're best at.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to those two things of, if you have a passion to solve something, solve that problem.
Yeah.
And then you consistently have to show up every single day and figure out, one, where you're strong, but also where you're lacking, right? Many times, I know for me, when I first started, I wasn't the best in marketing. I didn't understand press and how to build, OEM and sales partnerships. And so you also have to learn that. You also have to show up every single day and basically keep doing that over and over again.
No, this has been fascinating. It's like Dominick said, it's a whole different realm of business that we've been talking about today. So I love hearing about that and all your amazing experience. Coming from that scientific background is super fascinating to learn about, and excited about the products that you're creating, honestly, and like where it's going to go next in the food and beverage worlds and elsewhere.
Well, Ravi, for our listeners today is who want to get a Sutro, are there anything noteworthy? Is there any code that they can use to purchase a device?
Yeah, we kind of always have like sales that are going off. So you can go to mysutro.com and basically see online to see if we have anything up right now. But that's mysutro.com.
Yeah, and then one more time, the name of your podcast for everything related to water.
Yeah, that's Liquid Assets, and you can go to liquidassets.cc.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Ravi. It's been a real pleasure. I've loved the conversation.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me on.